Running a company is no easy feat. It is essential for business leaders to implement a plan of action to accomplish company goals. Welcome to the Forge Ahead podcast, where we will be discussing how business leaders effectively strategize for success. All right, let's talk business.
Hello, and welcome to the Forge Ahead podcast, where we will be discussing how leaders effectively strategize for success. I'm your host, Frank Vitale with Forge Business Solutions. Forge is a certified veteran business enterprise headquartered in Morgantown, West Virginia. We focus on strategic planning, execution, and that's designed to help organizations and businesses find success, growth, and partnership, with particular expertise in education, healthcare, and government services. Forge uses its knowledge and experience to improve enterprises of all sizes and sectors. On this episode of the podcast, I'm joined with Dr. Ssac Garrett, President of the West Virginia Athletic Trainers Association, and Gabe Roush, Manager of Sports Medicine at Pleasant Valley Hospital. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having us.
Absolutely. Glad to have you and look forward to a great conversation. So, Ssac, you are an accomplished athletic trainer and you're a force multiplier in the athletic training industry in West Virginia and profession. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, thanks. I'm born and raised West Virginia. I'm from Clarksburg, so about 30 minutes below Morgantown. I did the sacrilegious thing after graduating high school and came to Marshall University because that's WVU country up there. Came down here, actually came as a journalism major, decided that wasn't for me and switched to athletic training and basically fell in love with it. And some of that was derived from the high school athletic trainer I had when I was in high school. So that was kind of nice. And Marshall's been good to me. I stay down here. I have a bachelor's and 2 master's degrees from here. And then I went on and got my doctorate from Nova Southeastern. During my time down here, I became the clinical coordinator for the athletic training education program in 2012, and then recently was named the program director for the athletic training program here at Marshall University. I've also worked part-time at an outpatient physical therapy clinic right across the river here in Proctorville, Ohio. So I've had the luxury of being able to teach relatively young into the profession, as well as continue to practice. Because I did get in it relatively young, and honestly, it's kind of hard to teach something that you're not doing. So I've had the privilege of that. And then about 2014, I got involved with the West Virginia Athletic Trainers Association. Now I'm here today.
That's great. We're going to talk about the association in a little bit, but you're not just involved. You're the president of the board, correct?
I am. Yes. I became president last summer. Prior to that, I was the president-elect for 2 years, and then I served as the secretary for the state association for 4 years.
Yeah. Well, it's certainly an important profession because we have athletics is very important to the state. And with all of our student athletes and then our major universities as well, and the sports programs that we have, and the overall health and well-being of our student athletes is so important, and especially today with the challenges that we face in a global pandemic. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that. But you're a great example, Ssac, about someone who was born and raised in North Central West Virginia. You've gotten yourself educated, and you've done that. You've done a great job at that. But you've stayed here and you're making a difference. And so we appreciate that. And again, we'll talk a little bit more about that. And speaking of people making a difference, it's a pleasure to have you on the episode, Gabe. And please tell us a little bit about yourself.
Born and raised in West Virginia also. Grew up here in Mason County, West Virginia, along the Ohio River on the western side here. Graduated from W with a bachelor's in athletic training in 2012. I decided to kind of take that route as a segue into physical therapy. However, through the schooling and everything, I really fell in love with the work of athletic training. And I had a special place in my heart for secondary school athletic training within high schools. However, right after graduation, I had an opportunity to work in the NFL with the Denver Broncos as an intern. So I took that opportunity, which further emboldened my love for secondary school sports. It was a great experience, but I knew where my passion was after being able to kind of branch out and try new things. So I came back to the area, began working for a local hospital in as an outreach athletic trainer. And then in 2019, I was hired on in a local hospital here in Mason County, Pleasant Valley Hospital, to start up an athletic training outreach program with them. So that's where I'm at today, currently serving also as the head athletic trainer at Point Pleasant High School in Point Pleasant, West Virginia.
Well, great. Well, we're happy to have you on board, and I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you. I'm sure it was an exciting opportunity to be with the Denver Broncos. And you ever talk with John Elway or any of those folks?
Oh yeah, I mean, you see those guys every day. I mean, and they're all really great guys. It was Peyton Manning's first season with them when that big trade was made in 2012. So it was a great experience. You learn a lot in that setting. So. Yeah,
no doubt. Our guest today, Dr. Ssac Garrett, who is the president of the West Virginia Athletic Training Association, but also program director for Marshall University's athletic training program. And we're happy to have you with us. Also, Gabe Roush is with us today as well. And so, Gabe serves as the manager of sports medicine with PVH and is an athletic trainer himself. So we're going to dig into athletic training. Ssac, I got to ask you though about working in a Division I school and what that's like, and what you've seen over the past few years in changes with athletic training. We talk a little bit about that.
Well, yeah. So, the Division I level, it's relatively a little higher paced than at some of those smaller, D2, D3 schools. However, what I will say is that those that are working at the lower levels are often probably 10 times busier than some of the ones that are working at the Division I level, because you have a lot less staff and maybe twice as many sports than what you see. That's one of the models you guys see in West Virginia now with a lot of the smaller schools. I'll use AB as an example. Addison Broadus University they have well over 22, 23. It's probably in growing sports up there. And they have, I think, 2 full-time athletic trainers and maybe a kind of an intern that helps out with that. So you have 25 sports potentially going on, and you have 3 people that are supposed to be providing healthcare to all those individuals. And now you look at the world of COVID, where stuff got moved to the spring. So I do not envy any of those guys right now, trying to figure out the nuances of covering potentially 20 sports and all in the spring. And we're trying to figure that out here at Marshall University. Everything got pushed to the spring and Conference USA as well. So I know our athletic training staff here is relatively working hard, at the same time probably somewhat overwhelmed.
Yeah. These bubble, that have been created in all the professional sports as well as at the collegiate level, are interesting and actually, you think about, take Marshall football, for example, they did a pretty good job throughout the season of staying healthy and being able to, stay on the gridiron, don't you think?
Yeah, no, and I think that's a testament to, not only the players buying into understanding what they had to do right, but at the same time, the sports medicine staff done a great job of educating everybody involved, and as well as keeping everybody safe. I know that the protocols that were in place were relatively stringent. For example, they weren't allowed, our students, our athletic training students that we're working with, any of the on-campus sports were ultimately secluded to basically around a 30-mile radius of Huntington. So, it took a lot of buy-in from them as well to assure that they're keeping everybody safe, not only themselves, but the athletes as well. And we relatively from an athlete training student standpoint came came pretty unscathed through the whole entire process in the fall.
Yeah. And Gabe, we're, with sports being, especially the winter sports being pushed and delayed, actually getting ready to start back on Monday, just before spring sports start. I guess there wasn't a whole lot going on with regards to, high school athletes being sort of quarantined or in a bubble, right?
Yeah, not really. Each program was supposed to kind of design a little bit of a bubble type setup, which in sports like football, especially once you're in the meat of the season, fall sports, it was near impossible to really do that. And then coming into spring sports, I don't really think we're going into much of a bubble per the SSAC in the state of West Virginia. It's just kind of not necessarily full steam ahead, but it's kind of an approach back to normalcy, I suppose.
Yeah. Well, we're going to talk about that because, the high school sports, middle school sports, they're very, very important to our state as are college athletics. Mm-hmm. But before we get there, I think it's important for our listening audience to understand, what is the West Virginia Athletic Training Association and what role do they play? And because as a health occupation, if you will, a healthcare provider, I think sometimes athletic trainers, don't always get their due. They don't always get sort of, the consideration. But to every parent, of a student athlete, I can guarantee you one thing: the athletic trainer is extremely important. So, but I know that from an advocacy standpoint, and the West Virginia Athletic Training Association has been very, very important in shaping our culture, in shaping policy and legislation and so forth. So, Zach, I'm going to, start with you and ask if you could give us some insight, on the West Virginia Athletic Training Association, if you please.
Yeah, the West Virginia Athletic Trainers Association, or the WVATA, that's what I'll kind of refer to it as, is a nonprofit organization basically that supports athletic trainers in the state of West Virginia, as well as advocates for student athlete and physically active patients' safety. So, we do so we have several different committees, as well as we hold symposiums. We try to work well with other organizations such as the Physical Therapy Association, WVSSAC. I would say is one that we try to work relatively close with, especially as the policies are driven and basically trying to ensure student athlete safety, because I'm sure we'll talk about this, is that there's a giant gap for student athletes in the state of West Virginia having access to care from a licensed athletic trainer. And so I think one of the biggest things that the WVATA tries to do and will continue to do is advocate for the need for licensed athletic trainers in every school. Because again, there's so many of these areas, especially in the southern part of the state, that 30, 40 minutes from a hospital, when tragedy or an emergency strikes, or is everybody's ducks in a row to handle the problem efficiently and effectively and getting out unscathed. And I hate to say this, but history has shown that we're not really versed to handle that in this state, especially some of the things we've seen over the past 10, 15 years.
Yeah, that's great point. I mean, I think, because of social media, because of just, the 24-hour news cycle, I think we're all a little bit more aware of, the ongoing, heat strokes and death by heat strokes and concussions and the impact of major, injuries that, we're losing kids. Kids are dying, and that's the ultimate no-go, right? I mean, we cannot and should never lose a student athlete unnecessarily, especially, when something could be prevented. And we try and put up all the borders, right? We do physicals and everything, but But a lot of times it seems like once we get past the physical and the athlete's cleared, then we're off and running. But we have to make sure we're putting in safeguards, and we have to have qualified professionals to make sure that our student athletes are getting evaluated, being monitored. The practice plans are being coordinated appropriately. Weather's being checked, humidity, wet bulb. All of those things is being monitored appropriately and so forth. So I think all of that probably falls under the advocacy arm of the WVATA. Don't you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. When you think about an athletic trainer, and a lot of people don't really know what that is, you still hear the term trainer, and honestly, in our profession, that's something that it's like taking your fingernails and scraping them on a chalkboard. We like if you notice even on TV now, the proper terminology is athletic trainer. I'll be honest, one of the best ways to explain it sometimes is we're a jack of many trades. We do receive training in injury prevention and illness, clinical evaluation and diagnosis, not only from an orthopedic standpoint, but even from a general medical condition standpoint. Therapeutic interventions is a huge part of our profession, which is rehabilitation as well as modalities. So you think of ICE, electrical stimulation, those kind of tools. Those are all big areas that we work in. Emergency care. Oftentimes when someone goes down on the field, we're the first ones looking at them. And that's where this profession is really unique, is that there's not really one profession that exists that you will see an injury from the start of right when it happens, right then and there on the field. You evaluate it, treat it, rehab it, boom, you got him back on the field. No other profession does that. And a lot of people don't really understand that. A lot of people think, oh, you just tape ankles, you give people water. And there's so much more to the profession, especially as it evolves. We're talking about athlete safety here, but at the same time, this profession's emerging. Since in the past few years, there have been over 300 plus military jobs rolled out for athletic trainers. So that's a huge area that this profession is growing in. Performing arts, Cirque du Soleil is a good example. They have an athletic trainer that travels with them, as well as they have athletic trainers working every show out in Vegas. So there's a lot more to the profession than people really see. And from an advocacy standpoint, the more we can educate everybody that it's just not high school sports, college sports, pro sports, that an athletic trainer deals with physically active populations that sustain injury. I think that it's going to be our best way of everyone understanding what we're capable of doing.
Yeah. I mean, we're a long ways away from just let's rub some dirt on it and get back out there. So and I can tell you, by the way, as a certified coach myself, wrestling coach, and I've coached at both the high school and middle school levels. Hey, I want that athletic trainer right by my side if I can have them. And we'll talk a little bit more about that, because sometimes they're not there, they're not able to be there, and we don't always have an athletic trainer, and I want to talk a little bit more about that. But so Gabe, your boots on the ground, man. I mean, you're out there treating and as well. So tell us before we get too into that, what is the association, for you? I mean, how do you view the association and your role with it?
Well, I mean, from a secondary school athletic trainer standpoint, which I am involved with the Secondary School Athletic Trainers Committee through the WVATA, and they're kind of they're our representing body as a profession within the state of West Virginia. They're communicating with not only legislators in the State House in Charleston about just advancing the profession through licensure and whatnot, but they're also communicating with other organizations. And to me, and especially here within the last couple of years, and this is something that I think has been needed for some time, is communication with the WSSAC has started to improve. I feel like as that governing body has kind of overlooked some things, in my eyes, I feel like the WVATA has started those conversations, has brought more folks to the table in regards to that will ultimately affect what the APs are able to do and help student athletes.
Yeah. Ssac, talk a little bit about your membership. Is it statewide? Is it regionalized? What does that look like? And then just give us a 30-second, 60-second idea of what the national association's like.
Okay. I might kind of work my way backwards on that one. So the national, so historically, the way to become a member of the West Virginia Athletic Trainers Association, it was you basically automatically became a member for being a member of the National Athletic Trainers Association. Whatever state you resided in, that's where you became a member of. So as far as the bulk of our membership, they are NATA members. And then we do have some that are just state members, which I think, Gabe, you're just a WVATA member, correct?
Yeah.
And so, one of the things that, we do at the state level is we, because the NATA membership can be relatively pricey, and I'll be honest, depending on what level you're working at in the state of West Virginia, sometimes the pay is not the best. So we want to have an affordable option for people that want to be involved, because honestly, I want to see everybody involved. We're strong. There's strength in numbers, and the more people that we can have involved with us, the better off we are. So when it comes to being a member, ultimately we have different tiers, certified student memberships, membership levels for graduate students, but ultimately it is a relatively flat fee of $35 to be a member of the association. And what that does is that gives you access when we do have to our mailing list. So when we do have opportunities to get involved, you have access to those. When we have continuing education, you'll get a discounted rate when we offer those CEU opportunities. So that's the biggest piece of what we do now. As we move forward, I know you and I spoke about some of this stuff, Frank, is that there's a lot of possibilities for this association, and as we grow, I think we're going to be able to provide more value to the membership. I mean, one of the things that not a lot of membership knows that we've been doing is we've really been advocating to find grant funding to help support our secondary school athletic trainers with supplies they may or may not have, whether it be AEDs, spine boards, splint bags, because a lot of our secondary school ATs are outreach athletic trainers, and depending on the setup they have from a contractual agreement, the hospital may say yes or no to buying something. The school may say yes or no to buying something. So there's always probably things that they're missing. So as we move forward under, I guess, my tenure as the president, I'm really hoping to be able to provide more support for our athletic trainers in the state, as well as even our youth sports, because they have nobody there. Once you get outside of the athlete or the secondary schools, and I'll say primarily high school, because you have a very select few middle schools that have anybody there. Our youth sports leagues have nothing. So to be able to go out and provide some CPR training, give them an AED, I think that's huge. And that's what I think our association, we know that we can't have an athletic trainer everywhere, just because the financial reasons in some capacities. So we need to get out and educate as many people as possible and be a helping hand. So the bad things don't happen.
Yeah. Well, that's a great point. I mean, we have all of these travel leagues now, and in youth sports, and it's interesting. I have a 12-year-old myself, and he's out, playing different sports, and some of the travel programs, they might play, 60, 70 baseball games a year. I mean, that's a minor league schedule.
Yeah.
That's a minor league baseball schedule. So what's happening with their knees, with their joints, with their bodies, and Gabe, I mean, I'm sure you're seeing that when these athletes who are in rec and travel leagues get to you in the secondary schools, you're probably seeing the impact on their bodies from some of these high demand schedules.
Yeah. I mean, you definitely see a lot more overuse, I feel, currently due to that. I mean, I'm a proponent of being a multi-sport athlete, and that's a whole nother half hour, 45-minute discussion in itself, just in that. But no, it definitely affects the kids. And I think this year we're probably, especially coming into spring and spring sports as that overlap and everything, it's going to be an interesting March and April for the health of the student athletes. I'm curious to see how this all plays out. But no, in terms of the travel sports year round, like that definitely does come to the table in the high school athletic training room.
Yeah. So, speaking of student safety, I mean, the ongoing health, I think, certainly is something that has to be, is a staple, right, of athletic training, keeping athletes healthy, and the preventative measures that are taken. And then there's treatment, certainly. But right now with being in a pandemic, COVID is certainly at the forefront. And so when we think about returning to school, returning to athletics, safety has to be a major part. Gabe, what are some of your concerns about keeping our student athletes safe?
Here in the state of West Virginia, coming into fall sports, I felt like we were really ramped up and ready to go, prepared. Myself and our ATs, we developed protocols for the case that a student athlete did show signs and symptoms of COVID. We met with our health department, medical director, which is actually our signing physician also for our 3 schools, and kind of got that all mapped out. And then we were all abiding by the state's color-coded map. And then as things and numbers and percentages have changed since fall sports coming into spring sports, I'm just kind of concerned with if we're letting our guard down some. I do want sports back, and I think that they're safe to play. I do believe that, but I'd like to have all the bases covered and everything. But up until this point, at least in the state of West Virginia, I don't think there's been much of a significant statistic that shows transmission rates within sports. So that's always good to hear, but you still want to be prepared in case there is a large spike. So, yeah.
Ssac, does the association have a position on safety and providing any sort of best practices out to the field? No pun intended.
We came back in the fall and kind of expressed our concerns primarily over hydration. And I think that you're going to probably see some of this potentially again, just because it's not, 70, 80, 90 degrees outside doesn't mean you can't get dehydrated. Honestly, when it's in cooler weather, that's when you're less likely to drink. So we did put a statement out on hydration and the importance of it. But on a side note there, I think one of the things that we kind of saw in the fall and this is outside of high school sports. This is probably more along the lines of professional. And you're kind of seeing it here too. And I'm a pretty big hockey fan, so I'll just kind of mention that because it's something I've kind of picked up on and seen is that you're seeing these sports that didn't have much of a preseason to get ready that have jumped back in, and injuries are rampant. I want to say week 2 in the NFL. There was 6 ACL tears at least. That was crazy. It was like ACL Sunday. You're trying to think, what was the difference? Well, they didn't have any preseason games. They didn't have much of a training camp. They didn't. So now we flip this, and now we're jumping back into sports, and we're maybe not getting as big of a warm up into everything that we've been doing, but we're just diving back into it. So what happens? And more, you're probably going to see more of the musculoskeletal issue. Your knees, your sprains, your strains, that kind of thing, just because kids' bodies may not be ready to go. But that is a little concerning. And the other side of that, and Gabe can probably elaborate a little bit more on this, is that his schools, they're going to be they're going to have the luxury of having an athletic trainer there. Out of 115 plus high schools, 30 of them, 35 of them are going to have an athletic trainer there when all these spring sports kick off.
Yeah. And to kind of go a little bit more into that, especially with COVID, if a student athlete does come down with COVID and then they recover, we're seeing trends of cardiovascular issues with those athletes, and which makes them more susceptible to a cardiac event. So how many kids across the state of West Virginia have contracted COVID, recovered, but may have now an underlying condition with their heart? And then who's there to kind of monitor that situation and go from there? So that's kind of that's one of my worries as a secondary school AT. Fortunately, we have Mason County covered, but like Zach said, there's a lot of schools in the state that especially with basketball, there's nobody. Wrestling, there's nobody.
Yeah. I mean, and I think that's a great point, Gabe. And, I don't know who wants to feel this, but I mean, is this concern getting to the right decision makers in the state of West Virginia, across the nation? But, meaning, our school superintendents, athletic directors, and coaches do they understand the concerns that you just expressed? And is there a protocol in place to address it?
I think they hear it. I don't know if they're bold enough to make a move sometimes. I mean, Zach will agree. We've heard this even with fighting for licensure for the profession. I mean, now we're pushing for ATs in all schools, and what is always clapped back at us is, well, it's an unfunded mandate if we would do that. How do schools afford that? And I mean, there are a multitude of avenues that schools can make this happen. But in terms of the right ears hearing it, I don't know who else I think we could approach, Zach, as a profession, as an association. What do you think?
Well, I think it starts at the Board of Education level, and then I think it trickles down. The West Virginia Board of Education, the policy that exists, it says they want a certified athletic trainer to cover football. So there's the one kind of issue, and then that's where the superintendents, the principals, that's their loophole, because they don't have to find that money because the state says I only have to have somebody for football, and you're not going to find a licensed healthcare professional that is going to take $2,500 or $3,000 to cover 2-a-days and 10+ games. It doesn't make sense, especially now that the entry level to become an athletic trainer is a master's degree.
Right.
I hate to say it, if it don't make dollars, it don't make sense. So that's one of the struggles. So I think that, the West Virginia Board of Education has good intent. The West Virginia SSAC, they want to see an athletic trainer at all these events. I mean, because at the end of the day, that it makes it safer. And that's what they want to see. And to allude to kind of what Gabe has brought up is that, it's an unfunded mandate. Well, until I think there's some form of policy, and again, I think there's several ways that you could go about this, about saying, hey, there needs to be an athletic trainer for all, but give them some options. Have you explored, a hospital system? Could you contract one through there? Hiring one outright. We know that, Putnam County had a pilot program. They figured it out. They've retained those athletic trainers, and they basically work on a teacher's calendar plus like 20 or 25 additional days or something like that to cover the summer sports. So in that program, it resulted in saving a life within its first couple of years. Had there not been an athletic trainer there, the kid probably wouldn't have made it. So,
well, you mentioned football. I mean, I as a father of 2 girls who are both athletes, that they don't play football, and there may be a handful of females that play football in secondary sports throughout the state, but what about them? How do they have access to athletic trainers for their sports?
They don't. unless you have athletic trainers that are coming out of a contract. I would say contracted positions. You'll see more healthcare being provided to all student athletes. Mm-hmm. But if you're looking at schools outside of that Putnam County model, most of them don't have it.
Is that something you see as a challenge, Gabe, in your work?
From the outside, from the inside looking out, I guess. Fortunately, with what Pleasant Valley does with the Mason County schools, we have ATs there for every sport. And where they're junior, senior high schools, we're actually able to cover for junior high sports as well, which I'm really proud of as an AT and as being from West Virginia and everything. So we're trying to really get that going and build upon that here. But seeing that in other counties and then traveling to other schools with my athletes, then that's troubling, because like I'm sending my athletes to schools for a wrestling meet that I don't know if there's going to be anybody there. And wrestling is one of the most, I mean, let's face it, that's a high risk sport. Yet we're not required, the state's not required to provide healthcare services for that sport. And that's just one instance. And that could be said for every other sport.
Yeah. Yeah, no doubt. I mean, as a wrestling coach myself, that certainly is a concern of mine. I want to go back just for a minute though. And ask you, Ssac, considering what Gabe mentioned about athletes coming back now next week in West Virginia, middle school, as well as high school winter sports, which normally would be concluding around this time, are going to start up for an abbreviated version. I think there's a requirement of 14 practices, if I'm not mistaken, that have to be accomplished before competition starting around March the 3rd. As the association, have you all thought about putting out, either a white paper or some best practices so that athletic directors and coaches can get that information on how to use a short window of time to get their athletes warmed up and ready to take on competition?
We've discussed it. I think some of the delay has probably been more or less seeing if this is actually going to take off and happen.
Sure.
But yeah, no, I would say that you're going to see something forthcoming, similar to what we did in the fall. Just some best practices. I mean, in like you mentioned, is the SAC has put in a process. The biggest thing, is that coaches follow it, and that, your student athletes follow it. I think the hardest part about coming back now is that we are in cold and flu season. So is that just a runny nose? What is that cough? Albeit we may be back, but it'll be interesting. I don't know what else to say. Gabe?
I don't know what to expect, especially after these 3 months down and just kind of waiting.
Yeah. Well, and on a normal basis, meaning outside of a global pandemic, things like concussion protocol, we now know so much more about traumatic brain injuries and about concussions. And, so we have a pretty specific concussion protocol in place vis-a-vis the WVSSAC, or to our listening audience that may not know, it's the West Virginia Secondary Schools Athletic Commission. And so they've sort of adopted policies and the state board of education and local school boards, are on board, if you will, with these protocols. But you have to have medical professionals like yourselves to make sure that those protocols get followed, that proper assessments are being done. I think, if I'm not mistaken, there can be up to, at best, right, a 10 to 14 day, return, to the field, a return to competition process for, in the concussion protocol. But that's something that really requires a professional healthcare provider to be involved with, don't you think?
Yeah, I think by law they do have to go through that process, that protocol, before they can even step foot back on the field for practice and competition, depending on what stage they're on. And I think what the biggest discrepancy with that is, it's in place and it is a law, but I don't know how much, especially in some schools that may not have proper healthcare in place, like how much that's being followed, and then what are the repercussions of that for the school that might not be abiding by it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a great point. I mean, we talked earlier about funding. I mean, unfortunately, we see this in education. We see this in access to broadband, to technology, especially in a distance learning environment that we're in with remote learning. That the marginalized, the poor, the more rural areas of our state and our country are the ones that suffer the most because they may not have access to an athletic trainer. They may not have access to a gym. They may not have access to weights and stretch bands and things like that so that they can, get in shape.
Yeah. And that's one thing that me as a secondary school AT that and Zach and the rest of our executive board, that they promote this as well, is even in a rural school, like an AT is such a good investment for your student athletes, because in a more rural area, the AT might be the only healthcare professional that kid has access to on a regular basis. Yeah. So how much of I don't want to say lifesaver in this instance, but how much of a benefit is that to the student athlete that qualified healthcare professional is there? And then two, kids learn to be more self-sufficient when they have an AT to depend on. They can take their healthcare into their own hands and really show okay, I have this issue. I'm going to go to the AT. We're going to take care of this. And in the end, it's going to save the parents money through insurance costs, and it's going to save the school money.
Yeah. Yeah. Let me ask, is there, because in West Virginia, because winter sports are going to overlap with spring sports, which is something we normally don't see as much of. Is there a extra effort to provide additional athletic trainers to the schools, to the sport programs? Anything extraordinary going on there? Zach, I'll start with you.
No, because we will get told that we don't have the money to do that. So that's one of the big issues. The other part of it too is finding the licensed athletic trainers to be able to provide that care.
Yeah.
So that's one of the big issues we run into, is that we have 5 athletic training education programs down the state, and the majority of our graduates aren't here; they leave. So we do a very good job of bringing students in, educating them, but we've not created opportunities for them to stay. And that's probably one of the more frustrating things, from an educator is why aren't we creating these opportunities? Part of the reason I'm involved is because, I'm a product of this state. I love West Virginia. I want to see people stay here, especially when they come from far away and they end up loving this place. But yet it's a much better opportunity to go somewhere else. So we've not been contacted by the WVSSAC or the Board of Ed about any concerns over all this overlapping sports that are going to happen come this spring. Although I think our association, have tried to put it in the ear of the powers that be that this could be a huge problem.
Yeah, yeah. I guess on a from a proactive, positive standpoint, I think it offers opportunity, though. I think as we move forward, professionals like yourselves are going to be, more important than ever. And hopefully it'll, the aha moment will occur where people are, folks, decision makers, administrators, coaches, et cetera, are there to say, oh, you know what, we really need to enlist the help and support of our healthcare professionals, the folks that are around our athletes every day. And hopefully that happens. So we talked a little bit about the WVSSAC. What is the current, how does the ATA and the SSAC work together, Zach?
In years past, I don't know if they've really had that great of a relationship. We've always had involvement. They have a sports medicine committee. There's historically athletic trainers on that committee. But until recently, them hearing us vocally it didn't really exist. Or it hadn't existed until recently, I should say. One of the things that we did, we held an event last spring, the Corey Stringer Institute. For those of you that don't know, that the Corey Stringer was a NFL football player that died of heat illness. I don't know how long ago that was, like 10, 15 years now, I guess. Mm-hmm. But there's a Corey Stringer Foundation that runs up out of University of Connecticut. And they came down and they held an event, for basically superintendents, legislators. We had WVSSAC members there. And basically it was educating them on the risk of how serious some of these ailments, conditions can be, and what's best practices for this. So there was representation from the WVSSAC there, which was great. And I think the message was relatively well received. There weren't very many superintendents. We did have some athletic directors and administrators there. A few legislators stopped in through the day. But I think that was one of the biggest steps we have taken in improving our relationship with them, moving forward.
Do you see something like that happening again in the near future?
I do actually. To my understanding, that we're currently in the process of hosting another event this fall in October. That they'll be coming back down, and they use an acronym called TUFS, and forgive me, I forget exactly what that stands for, but ultimately, it's a similar event, and hopefully we can get a lot more people in the room. And that's going to be the best way to create buy-in is for them to hear it's just not only us, but it's these problems exist everywhere, and here's what other people are doing to help fix them. And just to kind of throw some numbers at you, I had a meeting this morning, and one of the other things that comes out of the Corey Stringer Institute is called this Atlas Project, which looks at athletic trainers that are available in secondary schools, and in the surrounding kind of states, or our district, I should say, which is made up of D.C., Maryland, Virginia, North Carolina, and South Carolina. All of them are relatively close to 70% of a high school kid having access to a certified athletic trainer in some capacity. West Virginia on that list is at 43%. And that's being counted as they have access to them year round. That's 43% have access during football season. Well, once football season's over, it drops down to about I think 29%.
Okay. Well, definitely opportunity for improvement. I mean, I think with the potential upcoming conference that you spoke about, the engaged activity now that that we're getting back to athletics, back to school. I think certainly. I know because I've spoken to some of the members of the State Board of Education. I've spoken to some of the local superintendents. They're very concerned about, making sure that our athletes stay healthy. So I think maybe we're at an inflection point, Ssac and Gabe, that we can get some attention on a very, very important matter because, so many other positive things come out of athletics for our students. And many students, there have been several national reports and surveys that have come back and that say that, student athletes have been adversely impacted by not being able to participate during this pandemic, and that it's impacted their, emotional, state of affairs, if you will, or emotional health. And so I think folks are excited about getting back, but we have to do so safely. And we really need to do, as we've been saying throughout the entire pandemic, but the same holds true for any time, we need to be led by the best of the best healthcare professionals. And you both represent that. Our certified and athletic and licensed athletic trainers represent that. You're a substantial part of the overall healthcare community. And we need to make sure that our athletic trainers always have a seat at the table. That's important because, because athletics are so important to us, And so many of our students participate in some level of athletics. Our trainers have the opportunity to really make a difference.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, yeah, I think Gabe probably can attest to this. Is the athletic training room at the high school level. That's where I got my start. The things that kids talk about in there, albeit not always the most appropriate, you learn a lot about what's going on in these kids' lives, and we oftentimes become pretty big parts of those kids' lives, and even role models sometimes. So I think as we do get back, I think that there's going to be a lot of athletic trainers that are in the secondary school setting, because I can tell you from the collegiate setting, from even some of my students have alluded to me that athletes are leaning on them right now, just because of just the mental side of all this, because it doesn't seem like it's ever going to end.
Yeah. There's no doubt about it. Let me ask you, as we transition here and begin to wrap up our episode, but what's the value proposition? So in the business world, we try to have our 30-second pitch down, about our business. I mean, Ssac, if you were talking to a superintendent or to an athletic director, and they're considering hiring an athletic trainer or bringing an athletic trainer on, how would you pitch the value proposition of doing that?
How much is a kid's life worth?
Yeah.
And then can you start there?
Yeah.
I mean,
that's big.
No, it is. It really is. You have an individual that can come in and
the jaw, Ssac.
Huh?
That's hitting them right in the jaw. But go ahead.
They come out swinging, right?
Yeah, that's right.
I mean, ultimately, you're going to have an individual that's going to be there. They can be utilized in multiple capacities. Sometimes we see athletic trainers in the secondary school setting, even as educators. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of different value propositions you can make in trying to get people to buy into this. Because there's several high schools that have sports medicine programs, and then you have certified athletic trainers teaching these kids about the trade and whatnot. But yeah, if I had a time again, some of it would probably be I'd ask, where's your emergency action plan? What happens when this kid has a cardiac event? Concussion. Who's allowed to say that kid can go back and play? And once I get a bunch of no's or I don't knows, because that's historically what you see when you start these conversations, is then I bring to the table that you're going to have a healthcare professional that's going to be able to do all those things for you. Make sure you're compliant. Make sure that these kids are safe. Make sure there's an AED out there. Make sure they stay hydrated. Also, educate. You're going to have somebody who's going to be educating those coaches as well to assure that you're seeing what these student athletes stay safe. I'm going to kick this a little over to Gabe here though, because this is his job now. He's got to go in and pitch these ideas. So what's Gabe going to say?
Gabe, you're up.
Well, so this is our first year with Mason County Schools, and what I have my ATs doing currently is we're tracking what we're doing for each kid every day. So if they're coming in for a manual therapy, if they're coming in for whether it be taping, bracing, stretching, therapeutic exercise, anything like that, we're tracking that down. And my plan is to have that all in a spreadsheet to show the value that the AT brings just to the school, and show what that means for a parent, especially in a low socioeconomic area, what that means for a parent, that savings that the kid does not have to miss school to go get something checked out that may not need to be checked out. The ATs are here for that, and just show that savings. And then on top of that, show what it would be like if that does happen, and then the school's secondary insurance, what that would have to pay towards, how much of a saving that is. And then if we're going to talk for bean counters, so to say, I mean, to me, that's more of their language. And I'm hoping that we're able to do that through what we're doing.
Yeah, no, I think that's well said. And I think documenting it, to be able to demonstrate, the impact, is certainly critical. We've seen support, with increased legislation for licensure, by the West Virginia legislature, and increased attention by our State Board of Education. I think those are positive signs for the athletic training profession. And again, we're at an inflection point. Speaking of inflection points, we're at that for our episode today as we wind down. I do want to give just a quick opportunity to each of you to any final parting words or thoughts that you have on the association or your profession individually. Gabe, we'll start with you.
I think my biggest thing that I hope listeners really take home is that having an AT on site is vital. I know it's not something that's traditional here within West Virginia, and I know folks have concerns about being able to afford it, but we've said this several times. There are several avenues for school systems to be able to afford this, to acquire an AT. The hospital that we contract through with Pleasant Valley Hospital, this is a small rural hospital of maybe 100 beds. And they're able to make this investment within the community because, they do see this as an investment within the community. But if a hospital the size of my hospital is able to make that investment here, I know that there's others that might be able to too. And then that's just one avenue. So I ask that folks just look into it a little bit more, contact somebody, start that conversation.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you for joining us, Gabe. We really appreciate it. And we'll hopefully have you back on to keep us posted and maybe talk a little bit about after we return to athletics. And so Ssac, how about you?
Oh no, yeah, I think Gabe, he took everything I wanted to say. No, I think it's great that we're getting this opportunity to let everybody know who the WVATA is, and that this state has a lot of good athletic trainers in it. We produce a lot of good athletic trainers, through our education programs, and anybody who wants to talk with us, if we reach out to you, give us the time of day, because I think we could really, swing you into understanding the vital component of having one of us on the sidelines, and whether it be at the high school level, the middle school level, the youth leagues, we want to be proactive and not reactive. We're here to help, and that's what we want to do. 90% of student athletes sustain some injury over a lifetime. Let us be there to help your kids. Let us be there to have a positive impact on that. And that's pretty much it.
That's great. I appreciate that. Ssac, if someone wants to get a hold of you or learn more about the West Virginia ATA, how do they do that?
Yeah, we have a website. It's WVATA.org. You can also follow us on Facebook at the West Virginia Athletic Trainers Association. And then we have a Twitter and Instagram, and that's at WVATA 1983. Excellent.
Well, we'll make sure we drop those links in our show notes, and so that our listening audience has a chance to see that. Gabe, how about you? Can folks reach you at work or at the high school? What's the best way to get in touch with you?
Honestly, email is the best way to kind of get in touch with me. And that's groush@pvalley.org.
All right. Yeah. All right. Great. Well, my guest today, Dr. Ssac Garrett, the president of the West Virginia Athletic Trainers Association, ATA, and Gabe Roush, who is the athletic director at Pleasant Valley High School. Did I get that right?
Athletic trainer at Point Pleasant High School.
Point Pleasant High School. My apologies. Point Pleasant High School. Well, gentlemen, it's been great to have you on the show, and I really appreciate it. And for our listening audience, this is a very, very athletic training is a very important profession. We want to make sure that we support it so that we can continue to have competitive athletics throughout the state of West Virginia and actually throughout the country. And we want to make sure that they have our support. So learn more about the West Virginia Athletic Training Association. I encourage everyone to do that. And I want to thank everyone for tuning in to the Forge Ahead podcast. I'm your host, Frank Vitale with Forge Business Solutions. To find more podcast episodes and learn more about Forge, I'd encourage you to visit our website at forgebz.com. You can subscribe to the Forge Ahead podcast on your favorite podcast app, iTunes, Google Play, and Spotify. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn. I want to thank our producer, Lindsay Moran, for all of her hard work. And if you have any questions or want to reach out, feel free to contact us at max@forgebz.com. Thank you and have a great day.
Thanks for tuning in to the Forge Ahead podcast. To find more podcast episodes and to learn more about Forge, visit our website at forgebz.com. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn. Show us how your company is forging ahead. Tag us on social media or use the hashtag ForgeAheadPodcast.